The cell door slammed shut with a sound that made Steve McQueen flinch. They were filming Papillon, but this wasn't acting anymore. Locked in that dark, tiny space on the movie set, Steve felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, the terror of being trapped. The terror he'd spent his entire life running from. This is the story of the escape Steve McQueen made when he was 17, and why he could never truly leave it behind. Boys Republic, 1947. Chino, California. Boys Republic Reform School. 17-year-old Steve McQueen sat on his bunk, staring at the fence. Not the first fence he'd seen. Not the first institution he'd been sent to. But maybe if he played it right, the last. He'd been here 6 months. Sent by a judge after being caught stealing hubcaps. The pattern was familiar. Petty crime, get caught, get sent away. Foster homes, youth centers, street corners. Steve had been cycling through this system his entire childhood. But Boys Republic was different. The staff actually seemed to care. The director, Mr. Panter, had taken an interest in Steve, saw something in him beyond the angry, abandoned kid everyone else saw. "You're smart, Steve," Mr. Panter had told him during one of their talks. "Smarter than you think. But you're running from something, and until you figure out what, you'll keep running into trouble." Steve had shrugged it off. But at night, alone in his bunk, he knew Mr. Panter was right. He was running. From his mother who'd abandoned him. From his stepfather who'd beaten him. From every adult who'd promised to help and then disappeared. From the shame of being unwanted. From the fear that maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was worthless. The fence seemed to whisper, "Run. Just run. Like you always do." But what happened next would change everything. One night, 3 of the older boys approached Steve. "We're getting out, tonight. You in." Steve looked at them. Tom, Jimmy, and Carl. They'd been planning this for weeks. Had a route mapped out. Wire cutters stolen from the workshop. A friend with a car waiting 5 miles away. Every instinct Steve had screamed yes. Escape. Freedom. Get away from this place, these rules, these people trying to fix him. "When?" he asked. "Midnight. Meet at the north fence." Steve nodded. Then spent the next 6 hours sitting on his bunk, heart racing, mind churning. This was it. This was the pattern. Run. Always run. Never stay. Never trust. Never give anything a chance to work. But Mr. Panter's words echoed, "Until you figure out what you're running from, you'll keep running into trouble." The choice. 11:30 p.m. Steve lay in his bunk, fully dressed. In 30 minutes, he'd meet Tom and the others at the fence. In 30 minutes, he'd be running again, like always. But something was different this time. For the first time in his life, Steve had started to feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't worthless. Mr. Panter believed in him. The boxing coach had been teaching him discipline. The shop teacher said Steve had a gift with machines. If he ran tonight, all of that would be gone. He'd be back on the streets. Back in the system. Back to being the kid nobody wanted. The clock ticked toward midnight. Steve sat up, put on his shoes, walked to the door, then stopped. He thought about his mother, how she'd left him with relatives when he was 3, how she'd show up occasionally, make promises, then disappear again. How every time she left, young Steve would think, "It's because I'm not good enough. If I was better, she'd stay." He thought about all the times he'd run from foster homes, thinking, "They'll send me away anyway. Might as well leave first." He thought about the pattern. Run before you're rejected. Leave before you're abandoned. Escape before the pain starts. Standing at that door, Steve McQueen made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He turned around and went back to bed. At 12:15, Steve heard whispers outside. Tom and the others waiting. At 12:30, he heard footsteps running. At 1 a.m., sirens in the distance. They'd made their attempt. They'd been caught. Steve lay in his bunk, shaking. Not from fear, from something else. He'd broken the pattern. For the first time in his life, he'd stayed. He'd chosen not to run. The next morning, Mr. Panter called him into his office. "I know about last night." Steve's heart sank. "I didn't." "I know you didn't. That's why I'm talking to you." Mr. Panter leaned forward. Tom told me you were invited, that you knew about the plan, but you didn't go. Why? Steve couldn't look at him. I don't know. I think you do. I think for the first time in your life you decided to stay somewhere, to see it through, to not run. Mr. Panter's voice was gentle. That took more courage than running ever could have. Steve felt something crack inside him, tears he'd been holding back for years. I'm tired of running. Then don't. Stay. Graduate. Become something. Show the world. Show yourself that you're worth staying for. The ghost of Boys Republic.
Steve did stay, graduated from Boys Republic, got a job, joined the Marines, built a life, became an actor, became a star, became a legend.
But that night in 1947, that moment at the door when he almost ran, never left him. It haunted him through every success, every film, every achievement. Years later, filming The Great Escape in 1963, Steve insisted on doing a scene that wasn't in the original script. His character, Captain Hiltz, would be thrown into the cooler, solitary confinement over and over. Each time, he'd emerge and immediately do something to get thrown back in. The director, John Sturges, asked, why does he keep doing it? Why not just follow the rules? Steve's answer was immediate. Because following the rules feels like giving up, like accepting the cage. And he can't do that. He'd rather be punished than accept being trapped. John stared at him. That's not in the script. It should be. It's the truth. They added the scenes, and Steve's portrayal of a man who couldn't stop fighting captivity, even when fighting made things worse, became iconic. Because Steve wasn't acting, he was remembering what it felt like to be trapped, remembering the terror that had driven him his whole life. But the real reckoning came 10 years later, 1973, Papillon, the film about a man wrongly imprisoned in French Guiana, spending years in solitary confinement, attempting escape after escape, never giving up despite impossible odds. When Steve read the script, he knew he had to play Henry Papillon Charrière, because Papillon's story was his story, not literally, but emotionally. The trapped man, the fighter, the one who would rather die trying to escape than live accepting captivity. The director, Franklin J. Schaffner, warned him, this role requires extended scenes in solitary confinement, tiny cells, complete darkness, long takes. It'll be psychologically brutal. I can handle it. Steve, it's not about toughness. It's about the psychological impact of feeling truly trapped. Steve's response was quiet but firm. I know what that feels like. The cell. Filming Papillon in Spain and Jamaica. The production had built replica cells matching the actual French Guiana prison. 6 feet by 4 feet. Concrete walls. One small window. Darkness. The first day, filming a solitary confinement scene, Steve entered the cell for a camera test. The door closed. The lights went out. And Steve McQueen, the man who'd conquered Hollywood, who'd faced death racing and doing stunts, who feared nothing, panicked. Open it. Open the door. The crew, thinking he was joking, didn't respond immediately. Open the fucking door. They opened it. Steve burst out, gasping, sweating, shaking. Franklin approached carefully. Steve, what happened? Steve couldn't speak, couldn't explain. The rational part of his brain knew it was a movie set, knew the door would open, knew he was safe. But the 17-year-old kid from Boys Republic, the terrified child who'd been locked in closets by his stepfather, the abandoned boy who'd felt trapped his entire childhood, that Steve was screaming. What Steve did next shocked the entire crew. After an hour to compose himself, Steve went to Franklin. I need to do this, but I need to do it differently. How? Leave the door unlocked. I need to know I can leave if I have to. Mentally, I need to know I'm choosing to be in there. Franklin understood. We'll shoot from angles where the door isn't visible. You'll know it's unlocked, but the audience won't. And I need someone outside, talking to me, reminding me it's just a scene. They worked out a system. Steve's stand-in, his friend Lauren Janes, would sit outside the cell during takes, talking quietly, keeping Steve grounded. The first take with this new system, Steve entered the cell. The unlocked door closed. Lauren started talking. "You're okay, Steve. Just a scene. I'm right here." Steve forced himself to stay, forced himself to feel the walls closing in, forced himself to remember Boys' Republic, the foster homes, the closets, all the times he'd felt trapped and helpless. And then he channeled it, used it, became Papillon, the man who refused to be broken, the man who kept fighting, the man who would attempt escape even when escape was impossible. When Franklin called cut, Steve emerged transformed, not panicked, not shaking, quiet, centered, powerful. That was Franklin struggled for words. That was extraordinary, Steve. Where did that come from? Steve looked at him. From the kid I used to be. The one who was always trapped, always running. I just let him out. The dream. For weeks during Papillon filming, Steve had the same nightmare. He was 17 again at Boys' Republic, standing at that door at midnight. But in the dream, he made the other choice. He went with Tom and the others. They escaped. But the escape never ended. Steve kept running through streets, through forests, through deserts, running and running and running, never stopping, never safe, always looking over his shoulder, always terrified of being caught, always alone. He'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, his wife Ollie holding him. "Steve, it's okay. It's just a dream." "It's not a dream. It's what would have happened. If I'd run that night, I'd still be running." Allie held him tighter. "But you didn't run. You stayed." "Did I? Or have I just been running in a different direction? Running toward success instead of away from failure. Running toward fame instead of away from poverty. It's still running, Ollie. I'm still that scared kid." "No," Ollie said firmly. "That scared kid made a choice to stay, to face his fear. Everything you've become started that night, not because you ran, but because you didn't." But Steve wasn't convinced. Until he met someone who made the other choice. During filming in Jamaica, Steve met a local man named Marcus, old, weathered, working on the set as an extra. During a break, they got talking. "You ever been in prison?" Marcus asked, seeing Steve in his prison costume. "Reform school. When I was a kid." Marcus nodded. "I was in prison, real prison, 18 years. What for? Running away from Boys Town in Kingston, got caught stealing to survive. Led to bigger crimes, bigger sentences. I spent my whole life running, Mr. McQueen, and you know where it got me? Right back in the cage. Over and over." Steve stared at him. "When you were at Boys Town, did you ever think about staying, about not running?" "Every day, but I was too scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared they'd see who I really was, scared they'd see I wasn't worth saving, so I ran before they could reject me, and I spent the next 40 years proving I was right, that I wasn't worth anything." Steve felt like he was looking in a mirror at who he would have become. "But you didn't run," Marcus said, somehow knowing, "I can see it. You're famous, successful. That means you stayed somewhere. You gave someone a chance to believe in you. You were braver than me." After Marcus walked away, Steve sat alone, processing. That could have been him, would have been him, if not for one choice, one moment of courage, one decision to face the fear instead of running from it. The truth about escape. Years later, in 1979, Steve did an interview for a documentary about Papillon. The interviewer asked, "Your portrayal of a man fighting imprisonment is legendary. Where did you draw that from?" Steve was quiet for a long moment. Then he told a story he'd never told publicly about Boys' Republic, about the night he almost escaped, about the choice he made to stay. "I've thought about that night 1,000 times, Steve said. Wondered if I made the right choice. And here's what I've realized. Escape isn't about running away. It's about running toward those guys who went over the fence that night. They weren't escaping toward freedom. They were escaping away from fear. And you can't escape fear by running. You can only escape it by facing it." So in Papillon, when your character keeps trying to escape, he's not running away from prison. He's running toward freedom. There's a difference, a huge difference. The interviewer pushed, "But in your own life, haven't you run? You left television. You've walked away from contracts. You've refused to be controlled by studios. That's not running. That's choosing. There's a difference between running from something because you're scared and walking away from something because it's not right for you. I learned that at 17, and I've tried to live by it ever since. But the true test came in his final days. 1980. Steve was dying of cancer, confined to a hospital bed, weak, suffering, truly trapped for the first time since childhood, and the old terror returned. His son Chad found him one night staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, I can't get out," Steve whispered. "I can't escape this." Chad took his hand. "Dad, you don't need to escape. You just need to face it, like you always have. I'm scared. I know, but remember what you told me about Boys Republic. About the night you stayed instead of running? You said that was the night you became brave. This is another one of those nights, Dad. Stay. Face it. Don't run." Steve looked at his son, saw his own eyes, his own fear, his own courage. "You're right," Steve said finally. "I'm not 17 anymore. I'm not that scared kid. I can face this." And he did. Steve McQueen faced death the same way he'd faced that fence at Boys Republic, by choosing not to run, by staying present, by meeting the fear head on. The legacy: after Steve's death, Boys Republic received a substantial donation from his estate, enough to renovate the facilities, to help more kids like Steve. The main building was renamed the Steve McQueen Hall. At the dedication ceremony, Mr. Panter, now retired but still alive, spoke. Steve McQueen became a legend because of his talent, but he became a man because of a choice he made at 17, a choice to stop running, to stay, to face his fear. Every troubled kid who comes through these doors now walks past his name, and I tell them his story. I tell them that the difference between being lost forever and finding yourself is one choice, one moment of courage. In that hall hangs a photograph. Steve at 17, standing outside Boys Republic on his graduation day, the fence visible in the background, and on Steve's face something that wasn't there before: peace. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was discovered decades later. In 2005, a filmmaker was making a documentary about Boys Republic. In the archives, they found a letter, written by Steve McQueen in 1963, sent to Mr. Panter shortly after The Great Escape premiered. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Panter, I've just finished a film about escape. Ironic, isn't it? The kid who almost escaped Boys Republic, making a movie about prisoners trying to escape. But here's what I realized filming it. I'm still that kid standing at the door at midnight, every day, every choice. There's always a voice saying run, run from commitment, run from vulnerability, run from anything that feels like a cage. And every day I have to make the same choice I made that night. Stay, face it, don't run. Some days I make the right choice, some days I don't, but I keep trying. Because you taught me something that night, even though you didn't know it. True freedom isn't escaping from things. It's having the courage to stay with them." Thank you for showing a lost kid that he was worth staying for. I've spent my career playing men who fight against captivity, but you taught me that sometimes the bravest thing is to walk into the cage, close the door, and face whatever's inside. I'm not great at expressing this kind of thing, but I wanted you to know that night changed my life, and every good thing that's happened since started with that one choice. You saved me by not letting me run.
Steve.
The escape that never ended. The cell door slammed shut with a sound that made Steve McQueen flinch. They were filming Papillon, but this wasn't acting anymore, because Steve McQueen never fully escaped Boys Republic, never fully escaped that night at the door, never fully escaped the fear of being trapped. But he learned to face it, to use it, to transform it from something that controlled him into something he controlled. Every role he played, the prisoner in Papillon, the cop trapped by duty in Bullet, the racer trapped by mortality in Le Mans, was Steve working out that same fundamental question. How do you be free in a world that keeps trying to trap you? His answer: you choose. Every day, every moment. You choose whether to run or stay, Whether to face the fear or flee from it, whether to be trapped by your past or freed by your choices. The escape Steve McQueen made when he was 17 wasn't over a fence. It was through a fear. And that escape, that choice to face what terrified him rather than run from it, echoed through every day of his life. The fence at Boys Republic still stands. Generations of troubled kids have looked at it and wondered, should I run? Should I stay? Some run, some stay. Each makes their choice. But hanging in Steve McQueen Hall is a quote attributed to Steve himself from that 1979 interview. I spent my childhood running from everything. Then one night I stopped, and I discovered that what I'd been running from wasn't captivity. It was myself, the scared kid who thought he wasn't worth staying for. The moment I stopped running, I started living. The ghost of Boys Republic haunted Steve McQueen forever, but not as a curse. As a reminder that courage isn't never being afraid. Courage is being terrified and staying anyway. That true freedom isn't escaping from things, it's choosing what you run toward. That the difference between being lost and being found is one choice, made in one moment, by one scared kid who decided he was worth staying for. Steve McQueen made that choice at 17, and then he made it again every day for the rest of his life. You're standing at your own door right now, midnight, a choice to make. Run or stay, escape or face it. Flee from the fear or walk through it. Maybe it's a relationship that scares you. Maybe it's a commitment that feels like a trap. Maybe it's vulnerability that terrifies you. Maybe it's just the fear that if you stay, if you let people really see you, they'll confirm what you've always suspected, that you're not worth staying for. Steve McQueen stood at that door in 1947, terrified, certain that running was safer than staying. He stayed, and it saved his life. Not because staying was easy, but because staying was brave, because facing the fear was harder than fleeing from it, because choosing yourself is scarier than running from yourself. Your fence is waiting. Your moment is coming. What will you choose? Will you run, or will you stay? Will you escape from, or will you escape toward? The difference is everything. Steve McQueen proved that every day of his life. The escape that haunted him forever was the escape he didn't make. And that made all the difference.